What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm going to be presenting a PowerPoint that I made dealing with the basics of astrology. So I composed a PowerPoint of it explaining all 12 signs, the planets, the aspects, and the houses, as well as other things. And I'm going to make this a series because I don't want the video to be too long. So I'm going to break it up in different parts. So in the first part of this video, or for the first installation, I'm going to be going over the signs as well as the planets. And then in the second part, I'm going to be going over the aspects and the houses. And in the third part, I'm going to get into some more complex topics. So let's get started. So the purpose of this presentation is to provide a comprehensive guide for astrology, where I talk about the signs, the planets, the houses, and all aspects. Because all these things must be integrated when interpreting a natal chart or when understanding astrology in general. You know, the zodiac wheel is a 360-degree wheel, and it's a circle symbolizing, the circle of life. And it is I said compromised. I should have said comprised or whatever. That it is made up of 12 signs, which each take up 30 degrees. It is also important to know that each sign and planet have a light and dark manifestation, or you could say good and bad characteristics, and it is important to understand each side of the sign so you can have a balanced, well-rounded interpretation of each signs. Um, and I have a few quotes that I put in here. One popular astrology quote is "The stars impel, not compel," meaning that when it comes to astrology, it is not all set in stone. Like, yes, there are certain things that are out of our control and that happen, but your natal chart is just a wheel that symbolizes the potential, and we are given free will to stir this wheel into whichever direction we choose. And if you don't choose to take initiation or take course of it, then your chart will just play out however it plays out, and a lot of times that will be to your detriment. Another saying that I'm very fond of is "as above, so below." So that saying explains why astrology is a very um, important science, and why it is an actual science and not a pseudoscience, because we are composed of the same materials or cosmic dust that are in the heavens. And these planets are very large bodies that are alive, and they do influence events on Earth. They're just not dead pieces of matter up there for no reason. They do influence us, and they do emit gases or solar prominences that influence us as well. And it is important that, if you are into astrology, that you do understand the real interpretation of each planet. So I like to think of it as the planets are the bodies or the machine or what is operating. The signs represent the expression or how these energies operate, or the characteristics, you could say. The houses are where the area of life is being expressed, or the environment that is being expressed. And the aspects show the relationship between these planets. So in order to understand the 12 signs, you have to understand the elements and the modality, which I'm going to get into in the next slide. But first, I just wanted to give a brief dissertation of each sign. So, or the properties of each sign. So, Aries is cardinal fire, represented by the ram. Let me move this out the way. Right here. Okay, there we go. Aries is cardinal fire, represented by the ram. Taurus is fixed earth, represented by the bull. Gemini is mutable air, symbolized by the twins. Cancer is cardinal water, represented by the crab. Leo is fixed fire, symbolized by the lion. Virgo is mutable earth, represented by the virgin. Libra is cardinal air, represented by the scales. Scorpio is fixed water, represented by the scorpion, Phoenix, and the eagle. Sagittarius is mutable fire, represented by the centaur or the archer. And Capricorn is cardinal earth, represented by the goats. Aquarius is fixed air, represented by the water bearer. And last but not least, Pisces is mutable water, represented by the fish. So when we speak of cardinal signs, when we speak of the elements are really a category that groups each sign into categories of three. Well, not categories of three, but group them. Each element has three signs in it, and the elements are basically characteristics that show a large part of why that sign operates the way that it does. For example, fire represents courage, initiation, life. Um, it is a masculine principle, and it represents um, projection and um, extroversion, being out there, putting yourself out there. It is a very boastful element. While Earth is a more feminine element, and it represents security, stability, the material side of life, such as money, cars, you could say food, and being grounded. Air represents communication, logic, reasoning, also keeping things fresh, not being tied down. So you could look at it as freedom. Air needs room to breathe, and water and air is a more masculine element as well. And water symbolizes emotion, intuition, bonding, and all of those things. And water is a more feminine element. And when I say feminine and masculine, I don't mean this in terms of mannerisms, but just in terms of feminine represents introversion or introspection, and masculine representing signs that project outward, signs that are more prone to, being putting themselves out there, more extroverted. The modality represents the mode of each sign, and the modality breaks it up into three different categories with four signs falling under each. So, excuse me, cardinal represents initiation, I like to say, because the cardinal signs, such as Aries, initiate spring, Cancer initiates summer, Libra initiates fall, and Capricorn initiates winter. And so the cardinal signs and the cardinal modality represents initiation, where you're beginning something, where you are more of a self-starter. Fixed signs are the anchors of the zodiac, and they keep things constant, or you could say they anchor things down and see things through to completion, and they lead to permanence. And the fixed signs are Taurus, Scorpio, Leo, and Aquarius. The mutable signs are more adaptable, changeable. They kind of lack that stability, and they are about keeping things dynamic. These are very dynamic signs, and they can sometimes be more so follow the lead of others, such as the cardinal and fixed modes. And the mutable signs are Gemini, Pisces, Sagittarius, and Virgo. When going back to the signs, in the next part of this video, I am going to go more in depth about the signs and what the signs represent. But just to go back on it a little more brief, Aries represents the archetype dealing with, the beginning of life, the masculine, a very masculine sign. It represents where you're stepping out and kind of stepping into your own light. And Aries is the first sign of the six personal signs. And then once you get to Libra all the way to Pisces represents the more interpersonal signs. And this will make sense once we start to get more into it. And this is the birth chart. As you can see, these are all the 12 signs on the wheel, and all of these symbols right here represent the different planets. So the first planet we're going to talk about is the sun. So everyone knows their sun sign for the most part. That is the sign that you were born under. And the sun originally governs the sign Leo in the fifth house, and it is exalted in Aries. And it is fall in Libra and detriment in Aquarius. So when a planet is exalted, that means that is the best place for that sun, for that planet to be. It performs well, and it also is able to use the full capacity of that planet. And when it's domicile, or when it governs a sign, such as the sun ruling Leo, that is the natural ruler of that sign, so it feels at home and it is able to express itself very comfortably. A sign is in its fall, or not, I'm sorry, a planet is in its fall when it is in the sign opposite of the exalted sign. So when a planet is in its fall, it has a hard time, manifesting its energies. It has a hard time functioning the way that it wants to, because the sign that it's in is very much so different from the very nature of that planet. For example, the sun represents your life force, creativity, the self-expression, love, personality, vitality, the men in one's life, the father, the children in one's life, your will, fame, honor, leadership, kings, ego, confidence, royalty, narcissism, as well as arrogance. And Libra is a sign that deals with other people. So as I mentioned earlier, Libra is an interpersonal sign. And so this very personal planet can feel a bit uncomfortable in a sign that is so focused on the affairs of others. In terms of profession, the sun can deal with theater, acting, leadership positions, any career that involves living according to your true purpose, because the sun deals with who you are at a core level. Core level. The sun is also, good for anything dealing with sales, or when you kind of have to, inspire people to do something. In terms of health, oh, I skipped the detriment in Aquarius. So detriment is not as bad as fall, but the detriment just means that this planet is, it's more uncomfortable because the sun rules Leo, and the opposite sign of Leo is Aquarius. And so again, Aquarius is a very impersonal sign, and when it is in a very personal placement like the sun, it has a difficult time shining through and expressing its own creativity as well. In terms of health, the sun governs the heart, spine, back and shoulders, vitamin A and D, health chakra, and overall health. So there's a whole section of astrology that is dedicated towards the medical side, or to it's called medical astrology. And when you get into medical astrology, or if you look into medical astrology, the sun in your chart basically is the planet that is responsible for your overall health, your overall constitution. Next is the moon. So the moon, a lot of people nowadays also know their moon sign. The moon represents the public, food, our domestic lives, the way we sustain ourselves, our mother, the women in our lives, the childhood, the home, our instincts, our unconscious, our imagination, emotions, habits, deeply ingrained behavior, our coping mechanisms, our feelings, reflections, as well as lunacy. So the moon originally governs the sign Cancer, and so this is a very emotional placement, and our moon is the very part of us that deals with our deeply ingrained behaviors and why we act the way that we act, and it is our true personality. Once you get past the sun sign and you really get to know someone, you're getting to know them on a more personal, intimate level. You're getting to know their moon as well. That's why it is important that in terms of compatibility, that the moon is supported. Now, the moon is exalted in Taurus because Taurus is a very stable sign. It is an earth sign, and it can represent stability as well as adding some type of anchor to the emotions, because the moon is always waxing and waning, and emptying and being full and pouring out. So that Taurus represents a very stable element. Also, Taurus is a sign of food, and the moon is about sustenance and food as well. So the moon does really well in Taurus. Now, on the other hand, it struggles a lot in the sign of Scorpio. When the moon is in Scorpio, Scorpio is a very turbulent and private sign that is apt to go to extremes. It is one where the emotions can be on a continuum, and it is very and it is often indicative of a very dynamic and interesting childhood. If the moon is afflicted, it can represent a childhood that was dealing with some type of abuse or some type of power struggles. And oftentimes, moon and Scorpio people have a love-hate relationship with the mother. It is a very turbulent sign. The moon is in detriment in Capricorn because Capricorn is the opposite sign of Cancer. So the moon is far away from home in Capricorn. And Capricorn is governed by Saturn. Capricorn is a no nonsense, get it done kind of sign. And it doesn't really focus too much on the emotional side of life. And it can struggle with expressing the more intimate side as well. So this can make for someone who can just feel very stifled in terms of the emotional expression. It can also point to perhaps a mother that may not have been that nurturing, and she may have been at work all the time with that Capricorn moon. But the good thing about a Capricorn moon is it does make one rather mature at an early age. The moon takes about 29 and a half days to complete a full cycle, so the moon moves very, very, very fast, especially relative to the other planets. In terms of profession, the moon represents anything dealing with food, such as cooking, a chef, working at a restaurant. It also represents being a storyteller. So even like a comedian, that would work well because of the imagination that goes along with it. Being a midwife, hospitality, caregiving, such as being in a nurse or nursing home, anything that involves water, and anything that involves working with women. So if you work, so if the moon is let's say it's in your 10th house or it's prominent in your chart, you may have a career where you work with a lot of women. In terms of health, the moon controls the tiles and it controls water, so it can deal with excessive or deficient body fluids because our body is about 85% water. And the moon can deal with menstrual as well, manic, as well as depression, issues of the bowels because that relates to bodily fluids. Next, we have Mercury. Mercury is the messenger of the zodiac. It is a planet that can never be more than 28 degrees away from the sun, and it governs the signs Gemini and Virgo. It is exalted in Aquarius because Mercury, like I say, is the messenger and the communicator, and it deals with our conscious mind, our communication and speech, our thinking, our education, books, duality, writing, contracts, our siblings, our relatives. It also deals with thievery, coordination, media, movement, and short distance travel. So Aquarius is a very intellectual sign. It is a sign that in its highest vibration can be associated with geniusness. So that is why the moon, not the moon, but Mercury does really well in Aquarius. Now it is in fall in Leo because Leo can be a rather naive and childlike sign. And with Leo, it's all about the ego. And so when you put that in a planet like Mercury, typically the person is too personal. They're too personalized. They're not really able to always understand, very abstract concepts, and they could just be very childlike in their way of thinking. Not saying that Mercury and Leo cannot be intelligent, but just as a general rule, Mercury and Leo can represent a struggle. But it is a very great placement for being a teacher or encouraging others for that place for that reason. It is in detriment in Sagittarius and Pisces. Sagittarius is a very broad-minded sign that likes to explore all possibilities and all of the horizons, and just it likes to aim free. And Mercury is all about detail and kind of, being very concise. So when Mercury is in Sagittarius, it has a hard time focusing and really paying attention to the little details. They have a tendency to get bored quickly and roam free, and but it can represent having a mind full of knowledge when you have a wealth of knowledge. And it is in detriment in Pisces because Pisces represents kind of like more of like the subconscious, and Mercury represents your conscious mind. So that can be an issue with focusing and paying attention to details as well. Anything involving writing and communication is a good profession for mercurial people, such as teaching, journalism, secretaries, clerks, and librarians. Also, working with the public, where you have to communicate as well. In terms of health, Mercury deals with asthma, reflex issues, cerebral issues, nervous disorders, and hormone signals. And with the hormone signals, basically, we have hormones that, signal our bodies to do certain things. So if your Mercury is kind of jacked up, you may have issues with, the communication cells. Venus is the love planet known as the lesser benefit. And that basically means that, it tends to be, a good source in our chart. It tends to represent things that are pleasant. It governs Leo, not Leo, Taurus and Libra, and it governs the second and seventh houses. And it is exalted in Pisces and fall in Virgo and detriment in Scorpio. So I have a video on my channel about the Venus signs. So I'm not going to go too in depth into that on this slide because I did a whole entire video titled How to Honor Your Venus. So check that video out. But just briefly, it is exalted in Pisces because Pisces is all about, art and love and compassion. And it is fall in Virgo because Virgo is a very critical, concise sign that really kind of can ruin the whole lovey-dovey nature of this planet. And it can just be very anxious and can just ruin the mood. And it is detriment in Scorpio because, again, Scorpio is very turbulent. Venus represents our love and romance, our aesthetic, our values, what we find attractive, pleasure, the arts such as dancing and music. It rules sex and desire, narcissism, our social activities, conformity, finances, superficiality, and indulgence. So one thing about narcissism I've noticed is that, a lot of narcissists have planets or have a very prominent Venus. So that could be like Sun conjunct Venus. And not everyone who has that is a narcissist, obviously, but if you are dealing with somebody, you're like, oh, they're a narcissist or whatever, and then you see they have Sun conjunct Venus, they may be, but on the more light end, you can just deal with someone who is just very superficial and very much so into their appearance and being attractive and being excuse me, and being all about that whole aesthetic. In terms of careers, Venus deals with anything that deals with beautifying something. So if you're a beautician, even something like architect is very Venus like. Singing, dancing, public relations is really big with Venus, as well as lawyers because it rules Libra. Also food as well, anything dealing with food because of the Taurus influence. In terms of health, Venus rules the throat, thyroids, and kidneys, the sweet tooth. And the thing about the sweet tooth thing is that, our Venus deals with what we find pleasurable and what we want to indulge in. So if you have a prominent Venus, such as Venus in the first house or your planets aspect in Venus, you may overdo it on the sweets or anything that you find pleasurable. Now Mars is the planet next to Venus, and Mars is known as the lesser malefic because Mars tends to function in a way that can be rather deleterious in some aspects of life. But Mars is a very important planet because it represents our drive, our aggression, our masculinity, our sex drive. It represents anger, men, conflict, sharp tools such as knives and swords, also guns, competition, and it is how we assert ourselves, our identity, our name, and the brain. So your Mars is very important. Without your Mars, you wouldn't have the motivation to do anything. So your Sun is your purpose, and Mars is the muscle behind it. So Mars governs Aries and Scorpio. So if you have Mars and Aries and Scorpio, then you have a very strong Mars. So you may be more of the aggressive type. And it is exalted in Capricorn, meaning that when Mars comes into Capricorn, Capricorn stabilizes Mars and it is able to operate in a very methodical, mature manner that can get things done. It's a very strong position. It is in fall in Libra because, again, Mars is about your identity and self-assertion, and Libra is a sign that is very much so about other people. Also, with Mars and Libra, there can be a tendency to always be involved in the conflicts of others as well. In terms of professions, anything that involves, asserting yourself, putting yourself out there, such as athletics, firefighting. It can deal with being a butcher. It can deal with where, you are the boss, or where you are the one who is um basically calling the shots. And it can also deal with where you may work with a lot of men in your career as well. In terms of health, Mars represents burns and cuts, inflammation, such as issues with the head and the face and the brain. It also represents blood, iron, the adrenal glands, phosphorus, chlorine, and cobalt. Next up, we have the greater benefic, Jupiter. I actually think that benefic is kind of blown out of proportion a little bit. Um, but that basically means that Jupiter is a planet that tends to function in a way that is very advantageous in our lives. So Jupiter in your chart represents your source of blessings. It also represents your higher education, wisdom, religion, philosophy, the higher courts, expansion, mass, such as things that are large. Also, blood, abundance, adoption, good fortune. It represents God, judgment, optimism, having a God complex as well. And on the more negative end, it can represent being blindly optimistic, being full of hot air, having that righteous indignation, being lawless, and being greedy. It governs Sagittarius and Pisces, and it is exalted in Cancer and fall in Capricorn, and at detriment in Gemini and Virgo. In terms of professions, it can represent professors, judges, clergymen, and truck drivers. And in terms of health, Jupiter represents our liver, the hips and thighs, diabetes, blood, circulation, weight gain. Also, issues with like blood sugar and high blood pressure and all of that is also common if you have a problem with Jupiter. Let's say Jupiter's in your sixth house and it's forming some negative aspects, then that could um, play out in that way as well. It is exhausted in Cancer because Cancer is about the home. So this could bring a lot of joy dealing with the home and dealing with the mother and dealing with the family. It can produce a large family. Also, it is fall in Capricorn because Jupiter is where we need to be optimistic and where we need to have faith. And Capricorn can be a very pessimistic sign and one that has to see in order to believe and one that lacks faith. And that can be problematic. It is detriment in Gemini because Jupiter represents expansion and growth, and Gemini and Virgo can be very remedial, not remedial, but very signs that are much more focused on the smaller detail, on the little things. And Jupiter is just a very broad planet that likes to focus on the bigger picture. It likes to focus on very abstract and very um just very large concepts in general. Moving on to Saturn. So Saturn is the last visible planet that we can see with the naked eye. And for that reason, Saturn is known as the gatekeeper, also the greater malefic, meaning that Saturn tends to function in a way that causes us a lot of distress. Um, Saturn represents, structure. Just think about the rings that surround it. It represents that whole structure idea. Also, limitations, boundaries, responsibilities, career, business, the outside world, the material world. It represents your profession, your career, also mastery, things that you can master, materialism, death, the third age or the elderly, karma, time, lead, the past, misery, depression, hard luck, loss, skepticism, pessimism, endurance, Satan, status, height, opportunism, and exploitation. So where Jupiter is the God concept, Saturn is the Satan concept. So there's the opposing energies right there. So after you leave Jupiter, you have Saturn. Jupiter is all about abundance and just things being very much so out of kind of just a more of a benevolent type of energy. And then Saturn represents constriction, where it's time to be more grounded and where it's time to be more responsible. And it rules the two signs, Capricorn and Aquarius. And it is exalted in Libra because with Libra and Saturn is able to be very methodical and really able to be exacting in its expression, is able to weigh the pros and the cons, and to really be very precise in its delivery. It struggles in Aries because Aries is very impulsive and it wants to do when it wants to do. And with Saturn, Saturn is about time. It's about holding back and waiting and being very thorough. And Aries is just too impulsive for that. Aries wants to go and it wants to go. And Saturn is detriment in Cancer and Leo because Cancer is, the home and the mother. So just like Jupiter is exalted in Cancer, Saturn is in detriment because this can produce a lot of responsibilities and hardships involving the home, involving the mother, involving the family. And with Leo, Leo represents one's children, also one's joy and vitality, and Saturn likes to constrict. So, you know, need I say more? The house that Saturn resides highlights the area of life where we are met with obstacles and setbacks. Once we overcome these challenges, we see an increase in the status in the area of life that the house rules. For example, having Saturn in the ninth house can manifest as a high ambition to complete college. However, many obstacles and delays may be present. Once completed, however, you will gain access to a new status in life. In terms of profession, Saturn can represent anything that involves the public or being in high status or anything that deals with hierarchy, such as the government and managerial positions due to the need for control. Saturn also represents builders, also anything that deals with heights, anything that deals with like being on top, and they can even be physical. Um, in terms of health, there can be issues with the skin, the bones, and the skeletal system because the skeletal system is what provides us with structure. So if you have a prominent Saturn, there can be issues with the skin, with the bones, with the skeletal system, even the teeth. Also, illnesses that manifest from depression. So a lot of issues or health ailments that we have exist in our mind long before they manifest in the physical body. And so with Saturn, there is that likelihood of being prone towards depression, or being prone towards being very stiff and very unyielding. And that can also, having a mind where you're very unyielding and very just stiff can manifest in the physical body, such as arthritis or any other physical limitations. It also represents vitamin C and fluorine and bioflavonoids because vitamin C affects that. Now, the more transpersonal planets are Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And these are the planets that take a very long time to complete a full cycle. So it takes Saturn about 29 years to complete a full cycle. And once we get to Uranus, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, you can't see these planets with the naked eye. These planets take a very long time. So they are known as generational planets. And Uranus is known as the ruler of the heavens. And it is the higher octave of Mercury, and it also governs Aquarius as well. It is exalted in Scorpio, fall in Taurus, and detriment in Leo. Uranus symbolizes rebellion, social causes, technology, convenience, unpredictability, electricity, things that are artificial, geniusness, the strange and unusual, alternatives, all sciences, including astrology and occultism, objectives and objectification, depersonalization. I think I have alternative on here twice. Perversion, willfulness, sudden change, upheavals, privilege, entitlement, homosexuality, spacecrafts, enlightenment, insight, satellites, and the future. So Uranus is a very kind of shocker type of planet. One is known as kind of like a lightning bolt planet where it never leaves you how it found you. So when you have a prominent Uranus in your chart, you can expect that your life may be filled with a lot of upheavals, and you may be very alternative. You may have an alternative lifestyle or a life where it is not normal in terms of society. And it is exalted in Scorpio because Scorpio is all about transformation and change. And so when Uranus is in Scorpio, it can use all of that magnetic energy and really create drastic changes, but drastic changes that, typically lead to something better. It struggles in Taurus. And, right now we have Uranus in Taurus. And because Taurus deals with conformity as well as things that are normal. And so when Uranus comes into Taurus, it shakes up everything that is normal, and it can produce things such as food shortages, things such as where everyday life, is subject to drastic change. It can point to artificial money or issues with money. And as you all know, since Uranus has entered Taurus about a year ago, um, you know, things have changed a lot. So, Miss Rona kind of came in and just did what she needed to do or what she had to do. And you could definitely say that Uranus and Taurus contributed to that. It is detriment in Leo because Leo is a very personal sign and Uranus is a very impersonal planet. And so Uranus is about, society and groups and, you know, geniusness and just alternatives. And Leo is too focused on, being liked and wanting to be popular and that ego gratification. And when you have Uranus and Leo, that can just represent, depersonalization, where the personality and the ego has to meld with, like a group, or where you kind of have to walk away from the spotlight and be a part of a group. And Leo likes to have their own individual spotlight. In terms of its profession, Uranus can represent working with sciences, being, or even with electricity, also astrology or any other esoteric science. And for example, the sixth house deals with, and I'm going to get into the houses in the next part of this, but the sixth house deals with work, and I have Uranus in Aquarius in my sixth house. So that deals with my interest in astrology in my day-to-day life. Also, pilots, activists, so people that work with social media, so the influencers, technologists, and computer science. It's all very Uranian. In terms of health, Uranus can represent illnesses that appear suddenly and leave just as quickly. Also, seizures and epilepsy, fractures, spasmodic disorders, and the nervous system. Next, we have Neptune. Neptune takes about 165 years to complete a full cycle, and Neptune represents disillusion, dreams, art, fantasy, compassion, empathy, chemicals, mysticism, escapism, drugs, addiction, selflessness, victimization, alchemy, poison, bondage, deception, homelessness, sorrow, and where you're easily impressionable. So Neptune is a very powerful planet, and it governs Pisces, and it is a higher octave of Venus. Um, in terms of profession, Neptune deals with anything dealing with art, anything dealing with water. It rules Hollywood and actors and actresses, the spiritual mediums, those who work in asylums or any type of institution or prison, non-profit organizations, and those that work with liquids, gases, and poisons and chemicals. In terms of health, Neptune can manifest as diseases or illnesses that are not easily to address or easy to diagnose, insanity, drug and alcohol issues, mental illnesses, and hypochondria. And then we have Pluto. Pluto was the higher octave of Mars. And so Pluto co-rules Scorpio. It is exalted in Aquarius, fall in Leo, and detriment in Leo, and Pluto takes 248 damn years to complete a full cycle. So Pluto is a generational planet, and you know you will not be able to live through a full Pluto cycle. And Pluto is a heavy planet. You know, it's a very tiny planet, but it is very heavy and intense in terms of its manifestation. It can produce, you know, it governs destruction, gang activity, assassins, criminal activity, power and destruction, death, atomic bombs, Hades or hell, obsession, rape, the underworld, trauma, crisis, regeneration. It also represents charity and philanthropy on a more positive end. Also, prominence and influence, surgery, extortion, transgenderism, therapy and counseling, as well as occultism. Professions that fall under Pluto are morticians, hitmen, medical examiners, those who work underground, such as welders and miners, influencers, spies, researchers, psychiatrists, nuclear scientists. Again, anything that involves going beyond the surface, garbage collectors, and those who work with people who are on the fringes of society. In terms of health, Pluto can produce issues with the reproductive system, piles, tumors, STDs or STIs, psychological disorders, demonic influence, and parasites. And last but not least, we're going to speak about Chiron. So Chiron is a minor planet that is known as the wounded healer. It has an erratic orbit between Saturn and Uranus, and it takes about 50 years to complete a full cycle. Chiron has yet to have a sign to rule. I hear some people designate it to Virgo, but honestly, I don't really see it. But who knows? Um, Chiron represents wounds such as psychological and physical wounds, where you want to be the exception to the rule, but where also where you are exceptional. It represents being a maverick, where you deviate, but also where you can become deviant, such as being an outcast. Excuse me. Also, it has a buck. It is a planet that has a buck the system type of mentality. On the positive end, it can represent being a healer, being a genius, and where you are wounded, but you now help heal others. However, on the flip side, this can deal with where one is wounded and now inflicts other wounds onto other people. This can also point to displacement, alienation, and where you have a chip on your shoulder. So someone who has Chiron in the first house, Sun conjunct Chiron, square Chiron, can, you know, have a mentality where they want to buck the system, and one where they may have a chip on their shoulder and they may be displaced and they may be in some need of healing. And in terms of health, Chiron can manifest as unusual health ailments and wounds that do not readily heal. Okay, and I'm gonna talk about this on my next in the next installation of this. So I'm gonna stop this video here. If you like what I had to say, please leave a comment down below, like this video, share this video, and subscribe. And I'll be back again with the next installation of this video, of this series. Thank you for watching.